My name is Iris Delgado, and 3 weeks after a billionaire died, his children tried to have me arrested for murder. They called the police. They froze my bank account. They suspended my nursing license before I could even call a lawyer. And they did all of it in one morning. I didn't scream. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even deny it. Because the man they said I killed had warned me this would happen, and he told me exactly what to do when it did. 6 months earlier, I was hired as a night nurse for Harrison Vance. If you don't recognize the name, you would recognize the company. Vance Pharmaceuticals. Global, publicly traded, worth billions. Harrison was 81, dying of pancreatic cancer, and confined to the 3rd floor of a mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut. His doctors said he had weeks. His children were already behaving like he was dead. On my first night, he looked at me and said something no patient had ever said before. "They don't know I can hear them," he whispered. "And they don't know you're going to help me prove it." I thought he was confused. I was wrong, because over the next 8 weeks, I heard things no one was ever meant to hear. I heard his son discuss falsifying corporate records. I heard his daughter explain how she forged his signature. I heard them plan how to remove me from the house once they were done using him. And every time, Harrison was recording. Not with hidden cameras, not with microphones. With a phone they forgot was on. 3 weeks after they fired me and destroyed my reputation, Harrison Vance died. And when his family gathered to divide a $2.3 billion estate, the attorney didn't open a will. He opened a video file. And Harrison Vance looked directly at his children and said, "If you're watching this, I'm dead. And everything you did, I saw." Then he played the recordings, starting with his son's voice saying, "It would be easier if he just stopped breathing." What happened next took 3 months, involved federal investigators, and ended with one of his children testifying against the other. But before I tell you how a dying man turned his own family into evidence, I need you to understand one thing. I wasn't the mastermind. I was just the nurse who stayed quiet long enough to watch everything. Before I tell you what happened in that house, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you believe that the people who watch in silence sometimes see the most. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because this story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when someone finally decides to pay attention. Let me take you back to the beginning. The Vance estate sat on 47 acres in Greenwich, Connecticut. I'd been a hospice nurse for 15 years, but I'd never worked in a house like this. The kind of house where the kitchen was bigger than my entire apartment. The kind of house where the staff had staff. I arrived for my first shift, expecting what I usually found in these situations. A family gathered close, making the most of remaining time, holding hands and sharing memories. That's not what I found. Harrison was alone in his bedroom on the 3rd floor. The curtains were drawn. A single lamp cast weak light across medical equipment and prescription bottles. He lay in a hospital bed that looked absurdly small against the scale of the room. His body shrunk to something fragile and temporary. "You must be the new one," he said without opening his eyes. "Iris Delgado. I'll be your night nurse, Mr. Vance." "How many before you?" I checked my clipboard, though I already knew. "I'm your 4th night nurse in 6 weeks." He laughed, which turned into a cough, which turned into a long silence while he caught his breath. "They keep quitting," he finally said. "Want to know why? I'm sure it's complicated." "It's not." He opened his eyes for the first time, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not defeat, not self-pity, clarity, sharp, cold clarity. "My children are monsters, and the nurses keep quitting because they can't stand to watch." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I checked his vitals, adjusted his IV, made notes in his chart. The silence stretched between us. "You're not going to argue with me," Harrison said. Tell me I'm being dramatic. Tell me family is complicated. I don't know your family, Mr. Vance. You will. He closed his eyes again. Give it a week. You'll see exactly what I mean. I didn't have to wait a week. The next morning, I was still on shift when the family arrived. Mitchell Vance, 54, Harrison's son, and the CFO of Vance Pharmaceuticals. He walked into the house like he was inspecting a property he already owned. Checked his phone more than he checked on his father. Spoke to Harrison in the loud, slow voice people use with children or the senile. How are we feeling today, Dad? The doctors say you're doing great. Harrison wasn't doing great. Harrison was dying. But Mitchell didn't seem to notice or care. Caroline Vance Shaw, 51, Harrison's daughter. She arrived with air kisses and a gift bag that she placed on a table and never mentioned again. She sat with her father for exactly 12 minutes, I counted, before excusing herself to take a call about a charity gala. Daddy, you understand, she said, already walking toward the door. The foundation work never stops. I'm keeping your legacy alive. Harrison said nothing. Tyler Vance, 28, Mitchell's son. He was the only one who seemed uncomfortable. He sat in the corner of his grandfather's room, not speaking, just watching. Once, when Mitchell made a joke about the inheritance, Tyler flinched. That's enough for today, Mitchell announced after 23 minutes. Dad needs his rest. We'll be back next week. Next week. His father had maybe 8 weeks to live, and they were scheduling visits, like dental appointments. After they left, I started to straighten Harrison's blankets. He caught my wrist. His grip was weak, but his eyes were not. Now you see, he said. I did see. I just didn't understand yet what he wanted me to do about it. The weeks that followed taught me more about the Vance family than any of them would have wanted me to know. They talked in front of me like I was furniture, like I wasn't there at all. And maybe that's what they believed, that the help was invisible, that the nurse, adjusting an IV bag, couldn't possibly be listening, couldn't possibly matter. They were wrong. Mitchell came by on a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks into my employment. He stood in the hallway outside Harrison's room, phone pressed to his ear, voice low, but not low enough. The Q3 numbers are handled, he said. Just like the last 6 quarters. By the time anyone audits, Dad will be gone and I'll have board control. Stop worrying. I changed Harrison's sheets. I said nothing, but I saw Harrison's eyes flicker toward the door. He'd heard it too. Caroline came by on a Thursday. She sat with Harrison for 8 minutes, then stepped into the hallway to call her accountant. I was refilling the water pitcher when I heard her. I need another transfer from the trust, she said, the usual account, and backdate the authorization to last month. I already signed Dad's name. She laughed at something the accountant said. He won't notice. He barely knows what day it is. Harrison knew exactly what day it was. Harrison knew everything. He just couldn't do anything about it. Or so I thought. It was a Sunday night, nearly a month into my time at the estate, when Harrison asked me to stay after my shift ended. Close the door, he said, and sit down. I sat in the chair beside his bed. The house was quiet. The day staff had gone home. We were alone. I need to ask you something, Iris. And I need you to be honest with me. Of course. Do you think I'm a good man? The question caught me off guard. I considered lying. The polite thing. The professional thing. But something in his face told me he would know. I don't know you well enough to answer that, Mr. Vance. Fair. He almost smiled. Let me rephrase. Do you think I deserve what's happening to me? No one deserves cancer. That's not what I mean. He shifted in the bed, wincing. My children. The way they talk about me. The way they're circling like vultures waiting for the carcass to cool. Do you think I deserve that? I was quiet for a long moment. I think, I said carefully, that children learn how to treat people by watching their parents. Harrison laughed. It turned into a cough. When he recovered, his eyes were wet, and I couldn't tell if it was from the coughing or something else. "You're right," he said. "I taught them this. I taught them that money was power, and power was everything. I taught them that people were assets to be managed, or obstacles to be removed. I built an empire, and I raised them inside it. And now I'm watching them become exactly what I made them." He reached for my hand. I let him take it. "But I have one thing left, Iris. One thing they don't know about." "What's that?" "Time." He squeezed my fingers weakly. "I have 8 weeks. Maybe less. And I intend to use every single day." "To do what?" Harrison Vance smiled. And in that smile, I saw something I hadn't expected from a dying man. Purpose. "To document everything," he said. "Every lie, every theft, every conversation they have when they think I can't hear. I'm going to record it all. And when I'm gone, someone is going to make sure the world sees exactly who my children really are." He looked at me steadily. "I want that someone to be you." I should have said no. I should have told him that this wasn't part of my job, that I was a nurse and not a private investigator, that whatever family drama was unfolding in this house was none of my business. But I thought about the way Mitchell talked about cooking the books, the way Caroline forged signatures, the way both of them spoke about their father like he was already dead, already irrelevant, already just an obstacle between them and his money. And I thought about Harrison, lying in that bed, fully aware of everything happening around him, but too weak to stop it. A man who had made terrible mistakes, who had raised terrible children, but who still had enough conscience left to want accountability. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" I said. "Nothing illegal. Nothing that would risk your license." He pulled his phone from under his pillow. "I just need you to make sure this stays charged, and stays nearby when they visit." I stared at the phone. "They forget it's there," he continued. "They see an old man with an old phone, and they assume I can barely turn it on. They don't check if it's recording. They don't think I'm capable of anything anymore. And you just leave it running?" Every time they walk through that door, a ghost of a smile crossed his face. "They've given me hours of material already. I just need someone to make sure it doesn't stop." "And what happens to the recordings?" "After? I have an attorney, Marcus Webb. He's been with me for 30 years. He's the only person left who I trust completely." Harrison's voice was getting weaker. The conversation was exhausting him. "Marcus will hold everything until I'm gone. And then you'll decide what happens next." "Me? I'm going to name you executor of what I'm calling the Vance Family Archive." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Not my estate. Mitchell and Caroline's lawyers have that locked up tight. But the archive, the recordings, the documents, the evidence of who they really are, that will be yours, to release or not, to share with authorities or keep private. Your choice entirely." "Why me?" "You barely know me. Because you're the first person in years who's looked at me like I'm a human being and not a bank account." His eyes were closing, exhaustion winning. "And because you stayed." The other nurses ran. "You stayed and watched and said nothing. That tells me you understand what it means to witness." He was asleep before I could respond. I sat there for a long time holding that phone, thinking about what he was asking. The next morning, I made sure it was fully charged. The recordings grew over the following weeks. Harrison would leave his phone on the nightstand, recorder running, whenever family visited. The phone was old, the case scratched and worn. His children glanced at it sometimes, but they never thought twice. Why would they? Their father could barely feed himself. The idea that he was documenting their crimes never crossed their minds. I remember the first recording he played for me, a week after we started. His hands trembled as he held the phone, but his eyes were bright with something that looked almost like life. "Listen to this," he said. They were in the study. They didn't know sound carries in this house. Mitchell's voice, thin through the phone speaker, but unmistakable. The quarterly filing deadline is next week. I need those numbers adjusted before the board meeting. Another voice, younger, nervous. Tyler, Dad. I don't think this is legal. It's legal if no one finds out. And no one's going to find out because your grandfather will be dead in 6 weeks and I'll have full control of the company. A pause. What if he's not dead in 6 weeks? Mitchell laughed. Then we make sure the board meeting happens before the next quarterly report is due. Either way, the numbers get buried. This conversation never happened. Understood? Tyler's response was too quiet to hear. Harrison stopped the recording. His face was gray with something beyond illness. My grandson, he said. I thought, maybe. I hoped. He sounded uncomfortable. I offered. He might not go along with it. He already has. For years. Harrison set the phone down like it weighed 100 pounds. I just never had proof before. Over the following weeks, the archive grew. Caroline on the phone with her accountant, detailing a decade of unauthorized transfers from Harrison's personal trust. Mitchell meeting with a man I didn't recognize, discussing how to accelerate the timeline on certain business decisions once Harrison was no longer a factor. A conversation between both siblings about which facility to put their father in, not for his care, but to limit his access to visitors who might hear his confused ramblings about family finances. He's not confused, Caroline said in the recording. He knows exactly what we've been doing. That's why we need to get him out of the house. Agreed, the new nurse is a problem too. She's been here too long. She might have noticed something. Then we get rid of her. Make something up. Who's going to believe a hospice nurse over us? I was sitting next to Harrison when we listened to that one. My hands were shaking. His were steady. Now you know, he said quietly. They're coming for you. What do we do? Nothing yet. Let them make their move. Let them show everyone exactly who they are. He reached for my hand. And when they do, don't fight back. Don't defend yourself. Just watch. And remember, Harrison. Trust me, Iris. I know my children. They're about to give us everything we need. He was right. 3 days later, Caroline arrived unannounced. I was in Harrison's room, checking his vitals, when she swept in without knocking. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering on the nightstand. On Harrison's phone. Daddy, she said sweetly. I've been so worried about you. Mitchell and I were talking and we think you need a companion. Someone to keep you company when the nurses aren't here. I have a nurse around the clock, Harrison said. His voice was weaker now, barely above a whisper. I don't need a companion. Well, we've already arranged it. She starts tomorrow. Caroline smiled at me, and the smile didn't reach her eyes. You won't need to be here as much, Iris. We're reducing your hours. That's not your decision to make, I said quietly. I was hired through the hospice agency. Your father's doctor. My father's doctor answers to me now. Caroline's voice hardened. I have medical power of attorney, and I've decided that the current care arrangement is excessive. I looked at Harrison. He gave me the smallest shake of his head. Don't fight it. Of course, I said. Whatever you think is best. Caroline's smile returned. I'm so glad you understand. After she left, Harrison reached for his phone. The recorder was still running. Medical power of attorney, he whispered. She doesn't have medical power of attorney. I never signed those documents. Then how? She forged them, just like she forges everything else. He closed his eyes. We need to move faster, Iris. They're closing in. That night, I stayed past my shift. Harrison and I went through everything, every recording, every document, every piece of evidence. He dictated letters to his attorney. He recorded video messages explaining each piece of documentation. He was exhausted, struggling to breathe. But he refused to stop. There's one more thing, he said as dawn broke through the curtains. The will. Your will? I have two. A flicker of something crossed his face. Satisfaction, maybe. Or vindication. The one my children know about. The one their lawyers have been fighting over for years. And another one, the real one. He told me about Marcus Webb, the attorney. About a safety deposit box in Hartford. About instructions that would only be triggered upon his death. They think they know what's coming, Harrison said. They have no idea. But we were running out of time. And his children knew it too. The setup happened on a Tuesday. I arrived for my shift to find the house in chaos. Security guards in the foyer, Caroline and Mitchell standing together. Arms crossed, faces arranged in masks of concern. There she is, Caroline said loudly. That's her. A security guard approached me. Ma'am, we need to search your bag. What? Why? There's been a theft. Mitchell stepped forward, his voice carrying across the marble floors where household staff had gathered to watch. My father's watch is missing. A Patek Philippe, worth over $200,000. I didn't take anything. Then you won't mind if we check. They searched my bag. They searched my coat pockets, and in the inside pocket of my jacket, a pocket I never used, a pocket that had been empty when I'd arrived. They found a watch. I stared at it. I had never seen it before in my life. That's not mine. I didn't. It was in your pocket. Caroline's voice was ice. My father trusted you. We all trusted you. And you stole from a dying man. I didn't steal anything. Someone put this here. Mitchell shook his head sadly. This is exactly what people like you do. You worm your way into vulnerable families. You gain their trust, and then you take whatever you can get. He turned to the security guard. Escort her out and call the police. I want her arrested. I looked toward the stairs, toward Harrison's room. I couldn't see him, but I knew he could hear everything. The house was old. The walls were thin, and his door was open. Don't fight it. That's what he'd told me. Let them show everyone exactly who they are, so I didn't fight. I let them take my badge. I let them march me out the front door past the staff, who had watched me care for Harrison for nearly 2 months. I let them put me in the back of a police car, while Caroline made a performance of wiping tears from her eyes. We treated her like family. I heard her say to the officer, "How could she do this to us?" I said nothing. I watched, and I remembered. The police held me for 6 hours before releasing me without charges. The watch was valuable, but there was no proof I'd actually stolen it. No video footage, no witnesses to me taking it, nothing but its presence in my pocket, and the word of the Vance family. But the damage was already done. The Vance's publicist had been busy. By the time I was released, my name was in the news. Hospice nurse accused of exploiting dying pharmaceutical heir. The story painted me as a predator. Someone who targeted vulnerable elderly patients to steal from them. My phone was flooded with messages. My agency called to say I was being placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The state nursing board contacted me about suspending my license. My daughter, Maya, was waiting for me when I got home. She was 19, a sophomore in college, home for the weekend. She'd seen the news. "Mom," she hugged me tight. "What happened? This can't be real." "It's not." I held her, breathing in the familiar smell of her shampoo, grounding myself in something real. "I didn't steal anything. They set me up. Then we fight it. We get a lawyer, Not yet." I pulled back to look at her. "I need you to trust me, Maya. There's more going on than I can explain right now. But I need you to trust me." She studied my face. She'd inherited her father's eyes. David had been dead for 12 years. But sometimes I still saw him looking back at me through our daughter. "Okay," she said finally. "I trust you." I didn't sleep that night. At 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. An unknown number. A Hartford area code. I answered. Mrs. Delgado? A man's voice, calm and professional. My name is Marcus Webb. I'm Harrison Vance's attorney. My heart stopped. Is he? He's still alive, but we need to move quickly. A pause. Mr. Vance has requested a meeting with you. Tonight. He says to tell you that the archive is almost complete. And he needs to give you the rest before it's too late. How? They fired me. They'll have me arrested if I go near that house. You won't be going to the house. Something in Marcus's voice shifted warmer, almost amused. Mr. Vance has arranged alternative accommodations for his final days. Accommodations his children don't know about. I don't understand. You will. I'm sending a car for you now. It will arrive in 20 minutes. He hung up before I could respond. The car took me to a hospice facility in New Haven, not the kind of facility Caroline had been threatening, but a private suite in a medical center that specialized in end-of-life care. The kind of place that cost thousands of dollars a day and guaranteed absolute discretion. Harrison was in a bed by the window, hooked up to more machines than I'd seen at the house. He looked smaller than he had just days ago, the cancer accelerating its work now that the end was near. But his eyes were the same. Clear, sharp, aware. You came, he said. Your children don't know I'm here. As far as they know, I'm still at the house, being cared for by the companion they hired. He attempted a smile. The companion who happens to be on Marcus's payroll and who's been reporting back to me about every conversation they have. Harrison, this is insane? He laughed weakly. I'm dying, Iris. I have perhaps 2 weeks left. Maybe less. I'm allowed to be a little insane. He gestured toward a chair. Sit. We have work to do. I sat. And Harrison Vance told me everything. About the recordings I hadn't heard yet. Conversations between Mitchell and outside investors about a fraudulent merger. Conversations between Caroline and a forger about creating backdated documents. A family meeting where both children discussed whether it would be more efficient if their father's decline could be accelerated. They didn't mean murder, Harrison said, seeing my expression. They meant increasing my morphine to keep me sedated. Quiet. Unable to interfere with their plans. He paused. Although, I'm not entirely certain they would have stopped there. He told me about the second will, the real one, hidden with Marcus, that restructured everything. The company would go into a trust with independent oversight. His children would receive stipends, not fortunes. And the Vance family archive would be placed in my control entirely. Why me? I asked again. You have attorneys. You have resources. Why leave this to a nurse you've known for 2 months? Because you stayed, Harrison said simply. Because you listened. Because when I told you what my children were doing, you didn't run away like the others. You stayed and you watched, and you helped me document the truth. He reached for my hand. And because I trust you to do the right thing with it, not the vindictive thing, not the dramatic thing, the right thing. What is the right thing? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, he admitted. That's why I'm leaving it to you. I've made too many wrong choices in my life. I don't trust myself to make this one. His eyes met mine. But I trust you. I stayed with him until dawn. We went through every file, every recording, every piece of documentation. Marcus Webb arrived with paperwork that made everything official: my role as executor of the archive, the conditions under which it would be released, the legal protections that would shield me from retaliation. One more thing, Harrison said, as I prepared to leave. The watch. What about it? It wasn't mine. It was my wife's. Something shifted in his face. Grief, maybe, or love, that had outlasted everything else. Eleanor wore it every day of our marriage. When she died, I put it in a safety deposit box. I couldn't bear to look at it. I don't understand. The watch they found in my pocket was a copy. A very good copy that Caroline had made years ago, so she could sell the original without me knowing. Harrison's voice hardened. She planted her own forgery to frame you. And she has no idea that the real watch is still safe. He pressed a key into my palm. Box 4471. First National Bank of Hartford. Eleanor's watch is inside, along with documentation proving Caroline sold a fake. When the time comes, you'll know what to do with it. I left the facility as the sun rose. I didn't go home. I went to a diner 3 blocks away and sat in a booth with a cup of coffee I didn't drink, staring at the key in my hand. I was holding evidence that could destroy a family, evidence that could send people to prison, evidence that a dying man had entrusted to me because I was the only person who had treated him like a human being in his final weeks. It was the heaviest thing I'd ever carried, and I had no idea what I was going to do with it. Harrison Vance died on a Thursday morning. I wasn't there. The hospice facility called me at 6:47 a.m. to say he had passed peacefully in his sleep, that his final hours had been calm, that he had asked the nurse to play a recording of his wife's voice before he closed his eyes for the last time. I sat on the edge of my bed and cried. Not for the man I'd known. I'd only known him for 2 months. After all, I cried for the man he'd tried to become at the end, for the accountability he'd wanted so desperately to achieve, for the weight he'd placed on my shoulders that I wasn't sure I could carry. The funeral was held 5 days later. I didn't attend. I wasn't welcome. And my presence would have caused a scene that Harrison wouldn't have wanted. But I watched the coverage online, the cathedral packed with politicians and business leaders, the eulogies delivered by colleagues who praised his vision and legacy. Mitchell and Caroline in the front row, dressed in black, performing grief for the cameras. No one mentioned the accusations against me. That story had already faded from the news cycle, replaced by coverage of Harrison's death and speculation about the estate. And then came the morning. Everything changed. 3 weeks after the funeral, 2 police officers knocked on my door at 7 a.m. Iris Delgado? Yes. You're under investigation for the murder of Harrison Vance. I didn't scream. I didn't defend myself. I didn't even deny it. Because Harrison had warned me this would happen. And he told me exactly what to do when it did. I'd like to speak with my attorney, I said calmly. His name is Marcus Webb. The officers exchanged glances. They'd expected panic. They'd expected denial. They hadn't expected a hospice nurse to have an attorney on retainer. Ma'am, we have evidence that you were present at a private medical facility in New Haven on the night of Mr. Vance's death. A facility his family didn't know about. I'm aware. We also have a statement from the Vance family, alleging that you manipulated a dying man, isolated him from his loved ones, and may have administered medications that hastened his death. I'm aware of their allegations. I kept my voice steady. I'd still like to speak with my attorney. They took me in for questioning. They held me for 6 hours, while Marcus Webb fought through legal procedures to reach me. They froze my bank account, a coordinated move between the Vance family attorneys and a sympathetic judge. They contacted the nursing board to expedite my license suspension. And through all of it, I said nothing. Because Harrison had told me, let them overreach. Let them accuse you of everything. Let them put it all on the record, and then let Marcus do what he does best. The will reading happened 3 days later. Marcus had filed emergency motions to halt any further action against me until Harrison's final wishes could be made public. The judge, presented with evidence that Harrison had been mentally competent and had made specific provisions for exactly this situation, agreed. So Mitchell and Caroline and their attorneys gathered in Marcus's conference room, expecting to finally divide a $2.3 billion estate. They found me sitting at the table. Mitchell's face went red. What the hell is she doing here? She killed our father. She should be in prison, not... She's here at Mr. Vance's explicit request. Marcus moved to the head of the table, unperturbed. Which you will understand shortly. This is outrageous, Caroline said. We're contesting any document that involves this woman. Our father was clearly manipulated. Your father, Marcus interrupted, was completely lucid. His mental competency was verified by 3 independent psychiatrists in the weeks before his death. All of their assessments are available for your review. He opened a slim laptop. But first, Mr. Vance requested that a video statement be played. We weren't informed of any video statement, Mitchell's attorney said. I'll need to review it. Before... You'll review nothing. Marcus's voice sharpened. This is the last will and testament of Harrison Alexander Vance. You can either watch it now or contest it in court and watch it there. Your choice. Silence. Mitchell looked at Caroline. Caroline looked at her attorney. The attorney shrugged helplessly. Fine, Mitchell said through gritted teeth. Play it. Marcus connected the laptop to a screen on the wall. Pressed play. Harrison's face appeared. Thin, pale, clearly filmed in the final days of his life, but his eyes were sharp, and his voice, though weak, was steady. Hello, Mitchell. Caroline. Tyler. A pause. If you're watching this, I'm dead, which means I can finally say what I should have said years ago. I watched the family's faces. Mitchell's jaw tightened. Caroline's smile froze. Tyler, sitting slightly apart from his father and aunt, went very still. I know what you've been doing, Harrison continued. All of it. The fraudulent quarterly reports, Mitchell. The forged signatures and unauthorized transfers, Caroline. The conversations you've had about accelerating my decline, keeping me sedated, getting me out of the way so you could take what you wanted without interference. Mitchell stood up. This is insane. He was clearly not in his right mind when... Sit down, Mitchell. Harrison's voice from the screen cut through Mitchell's protest. The timing was coincidental, but it landed like a command from beyond the grave. Mitchell sat. I know you think I couldn't hear you, Harrison's recording continued. That I was too sick, too confused, too close to death to understand what was happening around me. You talked about me like I wasn't there. You planned and schemed and stole, and you never once considered that I might be paying attention. His image leaned closer to the camera. But I was. I was paying attention to everything, and I documented it all. The screen split. On one side, Harrison's face. On the other, audio waveforms and timestamps. Let me play you some highlights. Mitchell's voice filled the room. It would be easier if he just stopped breathing. The silence that followed was absolute. Mitchell's face drained of color. Then, more recordings. Mitchell again. The Q3 numbers are handled, just like the last 6 quarters. By the time anyone audits, Dad will be gone, and I'll have full control of the company. Caroline's voice. I need another transfer from the trust, the usual account, and backdate the authorization to last month. I already signed Dad's name. Both of their voices overlapping. We need to get him out of the house. The nurse is a problem. Make something up. Who's going to believe a hospice nurse over us? On screen, Harrison's face returned, filling the frame. There's more. Hours more. Conversations about fraud, about forgery, about how best to steal from your own father while he lay dying 10 feet away. His voice cracked slightly. I built this family. I raised you. I gave you everything. And this is what you became. He took a breath. The recordings and documentation are being held in a secure archive. That archive is now under the control of Iris Delgado, the woman you framed for theft, the woman you accused of murder, the woman who showed me more kindness in 2 months than either of you showed me in 50 years. All eyes turned to me. I kept my face neutral. My heart was pounding. Iris has complete discretion over the archive, Harrison continued. She can release everything to the authorities. She can share it with the press. She can keep it private forever. Whatever she decides, I will support from beyond the grave. Mitchell found his voice. You can't do this. You can't give that kind of power to a stranger over family matters. Any court will uphold my wishes," Harrison interrupted from the screen, as if he'd anticipated the objection. "My mental competency at the time of this recording has been verified by 3 independent psychiatrists. My attorneys have prepared for every possible legal challenge, and every single recording was made in accordance with Connecticut law." His eyes, even on video, seemed to find his son's. "You should have been kinder, Mitchell. You should have been honest, Caroline. You had every opportunity in the world, and you chose to become thieves." The screen went dark. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Caroline laughed. "High and brittle and wrong. This is ridiculous. This is elder abuse. He was manipulated. That nurse manipulated a dying man into recording private family conversations. And now she's going to use those recordings to extort us. It's criminal." It's evidence," Marcus said calmly. "Evidence of securities fraud. Evidence of forgery. Evidence of theft from a trust. Evidence of conspiracy to file false police reports." He closed the laptop. "Including the murder accusation you filed against Miss Delgado 3 days ago." Caroline's face went pale. "The coroner's report confirms that Harrison Vance died of natural causes," Marcus continued. "Pancreatic cancer, as expected. No evidence of foul play. No evidence of medication tampering. Your accusation was baseless, defamatory, and given the recordings we now possess, clearly retaliatory." Mitchell stood so fast his chair fell backward. "I want to talk to her. Alone. That's up to Miss Delgado." Everyone looked at me. I thought about Harrison in that hospital bed, too weak to fight back but still trying to make things right. I thought about my career in ruins, my name in the papers, my daughter asking if the accusations were true. I thought about what Harrison had said. Not the vindictive thing, not the dramatic thing, the right thing. "I'll listen," I said. "But not alone. Marcus stays. If you've ever had to decide whether someone deserves forgiveness or consequences, stay with me. Because what happened next taught me something I didn't expect to learn." The conversation with Mitchell and Caroline happened in Marcus's private office. Mitchell spoke first. "Let's be practical, Miss Delgado. You're holding information that could damage our family's reputation and business interests. I understand you feel wronged by recent events. Perhaps we can come to an arrangement. Un arrangement. Financial compensation. For the damage to your career, the stress you've endured." He named a number. A large number. Large enough to make my breath catch in my throat. I thought about my apartment, my car payment, Maya's tuition, the nursing career that might never recover. "And in exchange?" I asked. "You destroy the archive, sign a non-disclosure agreement. We all move on with our lives." Caroline leaned forward. "Think about your daughter, Iris. Think about what this money could mean for her future." They knew about Maya. Of course they did. "And what about your father's wishes?" I asked. "He wanted accountability. He wanted the truth to come out." Mitchell's expression hardened. My father was dying and confused. He was manipulated by people who saw an opportunity. People like me. If the shoe fits, I looked at them both, at their expensive clothes and careful composure, at the lawyers standing, ready to turn any response into a negotiation. "I'm not going to destroy the archive," I said. Mitchell's face flushed. "Then what do you want? More money? Name your price." "I don't have a price." I stood up. "But I'm also not going to release everything tomorrow. That's not what your father asked for." Confusion flickered across Caroline's face. "Then what are you going to do?" "I'm going to do what Harrison trusted me to do. I'm going to make the right choice." I walked to the door. "And that means giving you an opportunity to make things right on your own, before I make them right for you." "What does that mean?" I paused at the threshold. "It means you have 30 days to correct the fraudulent financial statements, repay the money stolen from the trust, and come forward to the SEC voluntarily." I met Mitchell's eyes. "It means you have one chance to be the people your father hoped you could become. And if we don't, Then the archive goes to the authorities, the press, and every member of the Vance Pharmaceuticals board. I opened the door. Your choice. I left them there, staring at each other. In the hallway, Tyler was waiting. He hadn't gone with his father and aunt. He'd been sitting alone, staring at the floor. "Can I talk to you?" he asked quietly. I nodded. We walked to the lobby, found a quiet corner away from the attorneys and assistants. "I didn't know about the murder accusation," Tyler said. "I swear. That was my dad and Aunt Caroline. They didn't tell me until after they filed. Would it have mattered if they had?" He flinched. I don't know." "That's an honest answer." "I'm trying to be honest." He ran a hand through his hair. "I know I was part of it. The financial stuff. I knew what my dad was doing, and I didn't stop it. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that I was just following orders. That's what people always say." "I know." He met my eyes. "My grandfather used to tell me stories about his father, about how his father built the original company, before it became Vance Pharmaceuticals. He said his father always told him that the only inheritance that mattered was your integrity. That money could be taken away, but your name was something you carried forever." Tyler laughed bitterly. And then he turned around and taught my father that money was the only thing that mattered. That power was everything. That people were disposable. He shook his head. "I think he hated what he'd become. I think that's why he did all this. One last attempt to, I don't know, fix something. Maybe." "What are you going to do? With the archive?" I meant what I said. 30 days. "And if my dad doesn't cooperate?" I looked at him steadily. "Then the archive speaks for itself." Tyler was quiet for a long moment. "I'm going to testify," he said finally. "Against my dad, against Aunt Caroline. About everything I saw, and everything I was pressured to ignore. That's a big decision. It's what Grandpa would have wanted." He paused. "And it's what I should have done years ago." I didn't know what to say, so I said the truth. "That's very brave." "No, it's not." He shook his head. "It's the bare minimum. But it's a start." The 30 days passed slowly. I didn't hear from Mitchell or Caroline directly, but I heard about them. The Vance Pharmaceuticals stock price fluctuated wildly as rumors spread about internal investigations. Financial journalists started asking questions about quarterly reports. A source inside the company leaked information about irregularities in the books. They were being investigated, not because of me, not yet, but because Harrison's death had loosened whatever grip Mitchell had on the company's secrets. Other people were starting to pay attention. On day 22, Tyler called me. "They're not going to do it," he said without preamble. "My dad and Aunt Caroline. They're not going to turn themselves in. They think they can ride this out. That's their choice." "I know." A long pause. "But it's not mine." After we hung up, I called Marcus Webb. "It's time," I said. "But not the press." "Not yet." "Then who?" "The SEC, the State Attorney General, and the journalist who's been investigating the company for 3 years." I thought about Harrison's face on that screen, asking his children to be better than they were. They had their chance. The arrest warrants came on day 31. Mitchell Vance was taken into custody at his home at 6 a.m., charged with 14 counts of securities fraud and conspiracy. Caroline Vance Shaw was arrested at the airport, trying to board a flight to Geneva, charged with forgery, theft from a trust, obstruction of justice, and filing a false police report. The murder accusation against me was formally dropped. My nursing license was reinstated. My bank account was unfrozen. Tyler testified before a grand jury the following week. His testimony, combined with the archive recordings, provided enough evidence for federal prosecutors to build an airtight case. The trials took 14 months. Mitchell Vance was convicted on 12 of 14 counts. He was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Caroline Vance Shaw pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for cooperation. She received 8 years and was ordered to repay every dollar she had stolen from her father's trust, plus interest. The journalist published a 6-part series on the Vance family. It won a Pulitzer nomination and led to broader reforms in pharmaceutical industry oversight. Tyler Vance was offered immunity in exchange for his testimony. He took a position at a nonprofit focused on corporate ethics and transparency. We still talk sometimes. And me? I didn't go back to hospice nursing, not because I couldn't. My license was restored with a public apology, but because something had changed. I started consulting for hospitals and care facilities on patient advocacy and family dynamics. It turns out there's a real need for someone who understands how power and money can corrupt the most intimate relationships and what it means to bear witness when everyone else looks away. A year after the verdicts, a package arrived at my apartment. No return address. Inside was a velvet box. I opened it. Eleanor Vance's watch. The real one. There was a note tucked beneath it, in handwriting I recognized from Harrison's letters. Iris, if you're reading this, you made the right choice. Whatever that choice was, I trusted you to figure it out, and I trust you still. This watch belonged to the only person who ever loved me without conditions. I hope you'll wear it as a reminder that kindness matters, that attention matters, that sometimes the people who watch in silence see more than anyone else. Thank you for seeing me. Harrison. I put the watch on my wrist. It fit perfectly. I wear it still. People ask me sometimes what I learned from Harrison Vance, what wisdom I took from those months of watching a dying man try to make amends for a lifetime of mistakes. I tell them it's simple. Pay attention, even when no one thinks you're watching. Especially then. Be kind to the people everyone else ignores. You never know what they're seeing. You never know what they might do for you when the moment comes. And when you have power, even the small power of witnessing, of remembering, of choosing what to do with the truth, use it wisely. Not for revenge, not for money, not for the satisfaction of watching people fall. Use it for accountability. Use it for justice. Use it to give people one more chance to be better than they've been. Sometimes they'll take that chance. Sometimes they won't. Either way, you'll be able to live with yourself. That's what Harrison Vance taught me, and that's what I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. So, let me ask you this. Have you ever been the one who watched? The one who saw what others missed? The one who had to decide what to do with a truth that no one else knew? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't speaking up right away. It's watching, waiting, and choosing the right moment to let the truth speak for itself. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, please share it with someone who needs to hear this. Check out the video in the description. I think you'll love it. And remember, the people who pay attention are the ones who change the world. Goodbye for now.